In 1942 Berlin, Albert Speer adjusted a tiny lamppost on a vast city model. It was a vision of a future capital, pristine and impossibly grand. But look closer. At the base of its colossal great hall, human figures were specks, designed to be insignificant. This monstrous city was never built, but its plans were complete. Its demolitions had already begun. How close did we come to this terrifying reality? And what does the scale of our grandest ambitions truly reveal about the darkness we carry within ourselves? To understand what happens next, you need to picture Europe in the summer of 1940. It is not the continent you know. It is a map that has been violently redrawn in black ink. France had fallen in 6 weeks. The British army had been driven into the sea at Dunkirk. Poland was a memory. From the Arctic Circle in Norway to the Spanish border, a single flag with a broken cross flew in triumph. For the people living in this moment, a German victory was not a possibility. It felt like a certainty. In Berlin, the architects of this new age were no longer planning for war. They were planning for the world that comes after. You have Adolf Hitler, the fanatical visionary, who saw himself not as a politician, but as an artist, with nations as his clay. You have Heinrich Himmler, the quiet, meticulous bureaucrat of death, who was already drafting the racial floor plan for a continent. And you have Albert Speer, the master builder, tasked with creating a physical world so intimidating, so overwhelmingly powerful, that it would crush the human spirit into permanent submission. What you are about to see is not what they might have done. It is what they had written down, signed, and filed away, ready for implementation. These are the official government documents for the end of the world as we know it. The project was called the Neuordnung, the New Order. It was a plan not just for Germany, but for every man, woman, and child from the Atlantic to the Ural Mountains. Its foundation was not to be built on law or diplomacy. It was to be built on a terrifyingly simple, three-pronged blueprint: architectural dominance, economic slavery, and biological purification. The first phase had already begun in the demolition yards of Berlin, but what they were planning next would redefine humanity itself. And this is where the story stops making sense. The project to create Welthauptstadt Germania, the world capital Germania, was Hitler's personal obsession. You can picture the meetings late into the night in the Reich Chancellery. Hitler and Speer, two men hunched over blueprints, lit by a single desk lamp, redesigning the world. Speer's detailed plans show a city of impossible scale. The centerpiece was the Volkshalle, the People's Hall. Its dome would reportedly rise to nearly 300 meters, and some historians estimate it would have been 16 times larger than the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. On a cold day, the collected breath of the 180,000 people inside would have created clouds. It would have literally rained inside the building. Flanking it would be a triumphal arch, twice the size of the one in Paris, with the names of Germany's World War I dead carved into its stone, all 1.8 million of them. To build this, entire districts of Berlin were being cleared. Thousands of families were evicted. The granite and marble were already being quarried, some by companies reportedly using slave labor from the Mauthausen concentration camp. If you had been a resident of Berlin in 1941, you would have heard the sounds of demolition day and night. This wasn't a distant dream. It was a construction project in motion. But this city was a stage. The real horror was in the script written for the actors. In a different building just a few miles away, Heinrich Himmler's SS was drafting a far more important document. You wouldn't have heard the sounds of its creation. It was drafted in quiet offices by men in clean uniforms, using the sterile language of bureaucracy. It was called General Plan Ost, the master plan for the East. The document is chilling in its specificity. It was a detailed, phased plan for the ethnic cleansing of Eastern Europe to create Lebensraum, or living space, for German settlers. The plan stated, with cold arithmetic, that 31 million people were to be removed through a combination of extermination, deliberate starvation, and deportation to Siberia. It broke down the percentages by nation: 80 to 85% of Poles, 50 to 75% of Czechs, 75% of Belarusians, 50 to 60% of Russians. The remaining populations would be kept as an uneducated, illiterate slave class, serving German masters who would live in newly constructed, fortified farmsteads. Here is the detail that would have made your blood run cold if you had seen the document. It included a precise 25 to 30-year timeline for completion. This was not a wartime exigency. This was a post-war business plan for genocide, and the economic planners were just as busy. Directives sent to occupied France laid out the systematic dismantling of its industry. The plan was to revert France to an agricultural society incapable of ever challenging Germany again. A new currency, the Reichsmark, would dominate a pan-European economic union, with all resources flowing into the center, Germania. Every piece of this new world was designed to reinforce the others. The slave laborers from the east would quarry the stone for the capital of the west. The stolen food from Ukraine would feed the German families colonizing Poland. The new grand autobahns were designed with lanes wide enough to transport the Reich's new massive tanks to put down any future rebellion. If you had been in the room for any one of these planning sessions, you would have noticed the terrifying calm, the absolute lack of raised voices. You would not have witnessed monstrous rage. You would have witnessed the quiet, methodical efficiency of accountants balancing a ledger. But all of this was just the architecture for the new empire. The real plan was for the people who would live inside it. And that's where the documents get truly cold. And what they reveal next is even more disturbing. But there's a detail buried in the record that nobody flagged at the time. Think about the person you trust most in the world. Your parent, your partner, your oldest friend. Now imagine them sitting you down, their face illuminated by pride, to show you a map. On the map is a house, a farm, a piece of land they have just been awarded for their loyalty. It is your family's new home, a reward from the state. A beautiful place in the east, they tell you, with rich black soil. You can start a new, better life there. They are so happy, so full of hope for the future they are building for you. But you notice something. The names on the map are not German, they are Polish. And when you ask what happened to the family that lived there before, the family whose name is still on the mailbox, your loved one looks at you with a flicker of annoyance. They tell you not to ask such questions. They tell you those people were resettled. They were untermenschen, subhuman. They were an obstacle to destiny. And in that moment, the betrayal you feel is not just for the nameless family who has vanished. It is for the person sitting in front of you. You are watching their soul being hollowed out and replaced with a doctrine. This was the emotional core of the Nazi plan, to convince an entire nation that receiving a stolen home was an act of heroism. To make them complicit, not through violence, but through the quiet acceptance of a gift. The real betrayal wasn't the order to kill. It was the quiet decision to move in afterwards and never, ever ask what the stains on the floorboards were. What you're about to see is how this quiet complicity became the engine of a global machine. Here's where it gets worse. And here's what should make you deeply uncomfortable. This wasn't chaos. It was a system. For a long time, historians viewed the various Nazi projects, the architecture, the eugenics, the slave labor, the Holocaust, as separate, if related, monstrosities. But the documents show something far more terrifying. They reveal a perfectly interlocking, horrifyingly efficient machine where every part fed every other part. What you need to see is the cold, calculated logic of it all. The plan to starve millions of Soviet prisoners of war, known as the Hunger Plan, wasn't just an act of cruelty. It was a calculated economic policy designed to free up food supplies to be redirected to the German home front and the new settlers in the east. The gold fillings, the wedding rings, the eyeglasses taken from the victims of the death camps were not random acts of looting by guards. They were meticulously cataloged, melted down, and deposited into a special SS account at the Reichsbank to help fund the war effort. The immense stone carvings planned for Germania's triumphal arch were to be carved by prisoners at the Flossenburg concentration camp, a camp built specifically next to a granite quarry. The system was designed to be a closed loop of theft and death. The victims of one atrocity were used to finance the next. The murder of millions was not an unfortunate byproduct of the system. It was the fuel that made the system run. It was an engine that consumed human beings and produced power. And when you realize this, you see that no one was acting alone. The architect needed the slave driver. The slave driver needed the bureaucrat. The bureaucrat needed the soldier. The soldier needed the industrialist. And the industrialist needed the architect. It was a conspiracy of the entire state apparatus, a chain of polite, professional people just doing their jobs. But there was one final phase of the plan, a phase so vast it was never fully committed to paper, only discussed in the most secure rooms. It had a name, Endsieg, the final victory, and what it truly meant will shock you. The final victory was not about ending the war. It was about making war permanent. What you now understand, and what most people never will, is that the Nazi system was never designed to achieve peace. A stable, peaceful Nazi empire was a contradiction in terms. The entire ideology was built on the principle of perpetual struggle, of a constant war against racial enemies, both outside and inside the Reich. The documents and Hitler's own statements reveal a breathtakingly insane long-term vision. After securing Europe, the next target was the United States. The plan reportedly involved establishing military bases in the Azores and West Africa to support long-range bombers, the America bomber, capable of striking New York and other East Coast cities. Simultaneously, the Nazis were fostering pro-fascist movements in South America, planning to destabilize the continent and attack the United States from the south. This wasn't about politics or territory. It was about ideology. The existence of a multi-ethnic democratic superpower was an ideological poison that could not be allowed to exist in their new world. And the purification would never have stopped. After the Jews, it would have been the Slavs. After the Slavs, it would have been the Romani, the disabled, and anyone else deemed unfit. The system required a constant supply of new enemies to justify its own existence. The war would have become a permanent global crusade of racial cleansing. The real horror of the Nazi victory is not a static photograph of a swastika flying over the White House. The real horror is a never-ending film. It is a world where humanity is trapped in a permanent cycle of conquest, enslavement, and extermination forever. The system wasn't a means to an end. The system, the endless grinding process of purification, was the end. This is the truth that is so hard to face. This wasn't a political project that went wrong. The genocide wasn't a side effect. The genocide was the entire point. The sheer scale of this ambition is almost impossible to comprehend. The answer to the question you've been sitting with this entire video, how close did we come, is this: we came terrifyingly close. For 2 full years, from the fall of France in 1940 to the Battle of Stalingrad in late 1942, the Nazi war machine was functionally unstoppable. The plans for Germania and Generalplan Ost were not post-war fantasies. They were active projects being implemented by a state at the height of its power. The victory was averted not by a single decision, but by millions of acts of desperate resistance, by the brutal Russian winter, and by the industrial might of the United States. It was averted by a margin so thin it should keep you awake at night. And as for the deeper question, why we build such monuments, the answer is perhaps even more disturbing. The sheer scale of Germania, the meticulous detail of Generalplan Ost, they were not born from a position of strength. They were born from a place of profound cosmic insecurity. The need to build a dome that creates its own weather, the need to declare millions of people subhuman and erase them from existence. It is the ultimate compensation for a deep-seated fear of your own insignificance. It is the terrifying scream of a nihilistic void that can only find meaning by destroying everything outside of itself. The Nazi project wasn't about being strong. It was about a desperate, pathological fear of being weak. We are back in that silent room in Berlin, looking at the pristine white model of the city that never was. Most of the original models were destroyed in Allied bombing raids, shattered into plaster dust. But the blueprint survived. The carbon copies of the typed-out orders survived. The intent survived. The language has changed since then, but the blueprint for this kind of thinking remains. When you hear people today speak of national purity, of a great replacement, of a glorious destiny that can only be achieved by removing a certain type of person from the equation, you are hearing a faint echo from a concrete bunker in Berlin. The plans for Germania were not drawn by snarling monsters. They were drawn by professional, ambitious architects. The orders for General Plan Ost were not written in blood. They were typed on official government letterhead by clerks who were worried about their pensions. The greatest horrors in history are never committed by people who believe they are evil. They are committed by people who are absolutely, unshakably certain that they are building a better world. Remember that the next time you feel absolutely certain about anything. Tell me in the comments, which part of this almost world stayed with you?